G'day, welcome to the 40 channel. So today we're going to carry on with the F135 motor rebuild. Disclaimer, as you guys know, this whole build is to be done inside a shed with what you have available to yourselves. So yes, we're not doing everything absolutely spot on. Some things are not quite precise. I'm not an engine builder and this is not an engine building workshop. So what we're doing here is trying to show that you guys at home, anyone can have a crack at this with what you have available to yourself and still get excellent results with what you got. So let's get into it. Right, I put all the crankshaft bearings back in. Now, yes, I know that you guys are going, you should be buying new ones, you should be putting new ones back in, and you're probably spot on. Yes, I should be, but again, I was struggling to find some, and funds are pretty low. So I've inspected these ones. I spoke to a few different people, and they reckon that if there's no scoring, no damage, no nothing that's out of the ordinary on them, then we can reuse them. So I'm just cleaning all these little areas off with a lint-free cloth. I'm using lint-free so nothing gets stuck in there. Making sure that we put them in the correct way. So that all our holes, all our oil holes, everything like that, all line up. And then we'll drop the crankshaft in. Then we'll just put a little bit of tiny little bit of molly grease smear on every single one of these. So that way on startup, it's not going to bind up or it's not going to run dry. That'll be all in there. Then we'll put the crank on, put a bit of molly grease on the top, and then we'll just start to put some bolts on. It's going to take a small smidgen of molly grease. Now there is assembly lubes and all that type of stuff you can use, but this is what I've got. This is what I'm using right now. Again, you guys can hack on me, but I have been told that this should be pretty good. Really, it's just all we want to do is make sure that nothing's going to bind up on startup. So any lubrication we can get on these bearings that's not going to disappear or run away on startup. We know that this smolly tack's going to stay there. It's not going to move. Initial startup, we know we're going to have good lubrication straight off the bat. Sweet, crank is in. Righto, now we'll do the same. We'll put the molly grease on the white bearings and we'll slowly we'll just do them all up nice and loose. And we can come back and we can torque them all up. Righto, you can see this has been pin punched. It's got 3 dots on it, obviously meaning cylinder 3, and so does the top. So if we line all those holes up, we know we've got them back onto the correct way. We're using exactly the same shims. So everything lines up. Great thing about this engine, we've got markers everywhere. We've got two pin punch holes here, 2 pin punch holes here. So we just make sure we line everything up exactly where it all came from. Righto, so if we just make sure we line everything up exactly where it came from, well, we're pretty much guaranteed not to have an issue. Well, I'm not going to say guaranteed, but we should be on track. It's coming together nicely. Right, every single one of these shims, we're making sure that they're perfectly clean, as well as the surface they sit on, because we don't want anything in there throwing these shims out or throwing any of this clamping down. Now, I've cleaned all the rest up, put them all in. I didn't film it because the next door neighbour had the lawnmower going ballistic, and I thought, well, you won't be able to hear me. Put a tiny little bit of grease on the bottom of that, so that way our shim can just sort of stay in place, doesn't fall out when we put it in. Line all those holes up. Righto, now let's start talking all this up. Righto, so there's probably guys out there right now saying a few different things. One, I haven't replaced the bearings. Two, I haven't used plastic gauge to check on my clearances. Well, yes and yes, but the reason I haven't changed the bearings is they were difficult to find, and the bearings are actually in really good condition, so I'm going to leave them there. Nothing's been changed, so I'm keeping all the clearances the same. All the shims have gone back in the exact same position, so technically nothing's been changed, so I'm not going into that level of detail, and we should be right. But what we are going to do is torque all these bolts up now. The bolts on the end of the conrods, there's a fair big range according to Toyota's manual handbook. 4.8 to 7.6 kilos, 35 to 55 foot-pound. So I've decided I'm just going to pick somewhere in the middle. I've picked 5 kilos, which is about 40 foot-pound, and we're going to run with that. Now, I'm just doing both sides up a little bit evenly. I'm not doing one side up completely. Just do them up nice and evenly. There they are, they're clicking. Now our next lot of bolts are a couple different torque settings again. So first, second and third are 12.5 to 15 kilos, which is 90 to 100. Our last one's 10.5 to 13 kilos, which is 76 to 94. So these ones here, let's start 12.5. So we'll go right on the lower edge. Nip them all up first. Our back ones are a 17mm. Don't have to change anything. Righto, now what we need to do is fold that locking tab up, lock all those in place, and we're all torqued up.
How'd you go? How'd you been out driving?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
We went
Up in everywhere, man.
We went everywhere.
Oh.
Right, I've got an M plate here. Now I've just run a tap through all of these holes here just to clean them all up. The one that's The one that's important is this little tiny oil groove here. Now this sprays oil directly onto the gears that drive through to your camshaft. Now you've got the tapped hole there that screws into. That's an M10 by 1.25 mil. So that's a fine mil tap. Then we can just test that oil nozzle to make sure it screws in. There we go. So when we screw that in, you can see that little tiny hole just there. That's what squirts the oil. So obviously you want to make sure that that is facing between our two gears. So they've put it in place. They've knocked over a little bit of a burr there to hold it in place. That's why we've got these two marks here. That's what they've done there to hold it in place, but it's damaged the thread on the way. So we're all good now. Right, now the thread on here is a little bit bunged up too. So you just get a thread file and pick your right profile, 1.5 mil, and we'll just give that a little bit of a clean up. Right, and now we've cleaned up all our holes, cleaned up the plate. There's no burrs or marks on it. New gaskets. Cool, huh? These gaskets are all from fjparts.com. And they're in the States. So for all you American viewers, you can jump on there. Well, anyone worldwide can jump on there, but is our end plate gasket. Now it's pretty cool. You can actually see it's already got like a thin, I guess we're going to call it a gasket sealant already on it. So that's pretty cool. It's ready to go. Right, so the side of the gasket sealant or that rubber sealant will go on the back of the plate. Just line it up. Sit like that. Now we're going to put it on the end and we're going to bolt it all up. It's getting pretty exciting now, really. Right, so on the back side of this gasket, but I'm actually going to use the 8518, the ChemTools gasket sealer. Now this is an oil tolerant gasket sealer, pretty much exactly for what we're doing here. The reason I'm doing that is that this block's been pulled apart and the surface is pretty spot on, but they're just helping. It's got a really, really thin line just around here, just to give it that extra bit of confidence, I suppose. Righto, so you can see I've just followed that profile, very similar to what's on the other side actually. Just make sure that gasket is neatly tucked in, so it doesn't block any of those holes off, and that everything lines up beautifully. This is where this little sucker comes into play. I'm actually going to use some thread locker, 8263. So there's a rapid stick oil tolerant thread locker. So we're just going to put a tiny drop just on this thread here. Now that hole, I want that hole, I'm going to have another gear here that's going to come off the camshaft. That hole is going to squirt oil directly onto these two gears right here. The timing gear oil nozzle. Okay, once we've got it in place, screw it right there, so that'll squirt smack bang into those gears right there. We might just turn it a little bit more. There's our oil, there's our line of fire. Once you're happy with the position, pin punch and a hammer, just go over the side of it, and that will help lock that thread into place. Just make sure it's not going to move. Once you've got your oil timing gear nozzle in the correct location, all you need then, pin punch and a hammer, give it a bit of knock either side of it. That'll just crush in that thread, even though we've got the thread locker there, and just seal it right in place so it's not going to move. And that way we can always make sure there's going to be oil squirting onto our gears. Righto, so now it's time to put the camshaft back in. We're getting pretty close to being able to put all this cover back on and start putting everything back together, which is pretty exciting. Now we've inspected the camshaft, we've checked out all the lobes, we've checked out all the bearings, everything looks pretty good. So I'm really happy with the way that looks. We've got some Molytac grease and we've put that on all the bearing surfaces, just so that at initial startup, nothing's going to be dry and nothing's going to like grab or rip a bearing apart, because that's the last thing we want when we get this. Now the other thing is that we've got some timing on this. The best thing about this motor is it's so simple and it's so straightforward. So there's nothing really crazy about it. One on our camshaft gear and one on our crankshaft gear. Just got to make sure that they line up perfectly as we put it all together. Just try to go as careful as we can, because we don't want to knock any of those bearing surfaces. Just take your time as much as we can. It's a bit of a juggle. Alright, before we get too far, we can see we've got a timing mark right here. It's marked as a little dot, and we've got a 0 or an O punched into our crankshaft gear. So I need to turn my crankshaft gear a bit so we're sort of facing right on, and then we can line our two timing marks up so that they are spot on to each other. So we'll just pull out our camshaft. We're going to spin everything else. Isn't that exciting? It actually moves now, it's not seized anymore. I can move this whole thing, spin it all around, pistons move up and down. Pretty excited about that actually.
You seem very excited about it.
I am. Because this is like a helical gear cut. So when you think you've lined up, okay, say we line our two marks up, as soon as we put them together, it actually spins a little bit, so it'll throw the mark off. So we're actually going to pull our mark back one tooth, and as we slide it on, you'll see those two marks come together. Next thing we need to do is just spin our little support bracket inside and bolt up the inside of this camshaft. Just set our bolt into our socket, that way we can sit it in there and line it up. Right, now the bolts are in. I'm just going to give it a small tap with a dead blow hammer. Just going to tighten these up, just very lightly to start with. Right, now with your trusty torque wrench, make sure you get a good quality torque wrench. You can jump on Tool King's webpage, toolking.com.au, and hit those guys up. This one here is actually a King Tony torque wrench. Now 14.5 foot-pound or 2 kilos of torque. So again, I'm just working backwards and forwards. That one's just clicked. All right, that one's clicked. So that's done. There's not a huge amount on that, but we know it's right now. Right, now if you want to check the backlash, you can go 1/8 thou or 0.2 of a millimeter backlash. So all we do there is just put a feeler gauge in, and we can check that. Now we're going to have to cut a feeler gauge down so it actually fits into that. And then if you really want to get carried away, we can put a magnet on here, put a dial indicator on, and we can check the run out. And the run out is exactly the same, no more than 1/8 thou or 0.2 of a millimeter. Now I've got my feeler gauge. All I did was I just made a little modification, just cleaned it up so that there was actually no sharp edges or burrs whatsoever. Now if that fits in there, then we know that we're no good. Bit of a test. Open it up as much as we can. And there is no way that's going to fit in there. So now our backlash is basically, well, it's got to be pretty much on spec. Now I'm not going to go modify a whole lot to actually find out what it is. All I care about is that there is no way my 1/8 thou or 0.2 millimeter feeler gauge is going to fit in there. So we're all good. As far as my run out, I can't actually check that because for some reason I cannot find my rod to my dial indicator. So I can find my dial indicator, but I can't find my magnet and my support rod. I have no idea what I've done with it, but to be honest, everything's been so good on this motor so far as what I've measured. I'm actually going to skip this. With the backlash being so small, everything else that I've measured up has been pretty much spot on. I'm going to have faith and know that that one's okay. Righto, let's chuck our oil slinger back on. So the cup face is out. Next thing we're going to do is our brand new cork gasket. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just to help seal all this off. We're just going to run a bit of the 8518, a small little smear around here, and that'll help the gasket stay in position when we're trying to put it all together, because it's just going to slip around and it's going to be hard to hold in place. So this will just help it hold in place. It'll guarantee that it's going to seal. Plus, this is oil tolerant, so we don't have to worry about it breaking down or going crazy or anything like that. So, quick, easy solution to make life a whole lot easier. Now, make sure your surfaces are completely clean. Give them a wipe down, some grease and wax remover, all that type of stuff before you apply this. I'm just going to give it a nice little bead. See, we don't have to go over the top with this. Get our cover and our gasket. Just going to make sure all our holes line up perfectly. Just give a slight little bit of pressure. As you can see, the gasket sealer is holding that in place, so it's going to make life a stack easier when we're trying to put this back together. Gently throw this on place. Gently throw on, yeah, that's a good way of describing it. Now I'm using the original top bolts. These actually have a little rubber seal just around the back of that washer there. Now I'm actually going to put some gasket sealant around that as well, because this is coming straight from the inside of the block and we don't want any oil leaking out of this. So I'm going to put the 8518 gasket sealer around that rubber seal. 8263 oil tolerant thread locker. Just putting a dab on that. Now this is not so much to lock the thread in place, but more so to seal any oil coming out of these holes. Righto, so all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to nip all these little bolts up just lightly, just so that the spring washer just compresses. I'm going to go no tighter than that. Righto, my GoPro's gone flat, so I've had to resort to the phone. Righto, so to torque these up, so small torque rating, it's only 12 foot-pound, which is 1.6 kilos. We're just going to work our way very slowly around it, do them all up. Righto, so now we're going to oil seal. Now, it'd be good to have like a bearing installation tool, but I'm using, as always, a huge socket. So this particular one is a 2-inch socket, just smaller than the actual seal, and a dead blow hammer. So we're just going to sit that in place. Just give a slight tap with the dead blow hammer. Get our socket, sit it over the top. Righto, we've got the seal in. Now we're going to install the crank pulley. So this has all been cleaned up. We cleaned up the shaft before we put all those bits and pieces on. We just get some Molytac grease, a very light smear on the outside with some Molytac grease as well, and we'll tap the whole thing in, line up our keyway. Quick spray with some R44. Let's get a bigger dead blow hammer. I think we're home. Give it a couple more hits just to make sure. I think that's it. I have to say that's really satisfying that everything turns over. That's sensational. Righto, that's it for this episode. So we've still got a lot more to go with this motor, as you can see. Just putting into small little bite-sized chunks for you guys. Yes, now I'm sure there'll be a few comments on some different things that we haven't quite done right, but as I said before, we're not a full motor rebuild shop. We're doing what we can with what we got and what's available with the old F135 motor, to be able to show that you guys can have a crack at this in your own workshop without having to go to the full extent of doing a full replacement of everything and taking it to a machine shop and going the full hog. Righto guys, feel free to leave a comment, and until next time, take care of yourselves.